Welcome, ladies and gentlemen of whatever gender you prefer. This is B3 In Depth, episode number 5. And my name is Johannes Grenzfurtner. I'm an Austrian artist, filmmaker, writer, performer, founded a crazy art and technology group called Monochrome some 30 years ago, something like that. And it's a great pleasure being able to host this series of conversations for the B3 Biennial in Frankfurt. And what can I say? A big virtual applause for Jason Scott, who is connected to me through the interwebs from New York State, I think. That's right.
It's been over a decade, buddy. At least, like we're getting on a decade and a half.
Something
I
like
think.
that, yes.
15
It
years.
was,
That's
yeah, absolutely. I
like
saw
just
you. Yeah, you had a similar hat like that, the one you wearing today, on stage at the Hope Conference. It's called
correct.
the Hope Conference, Hackers on Planet Earth, some like 10 years ago, something like that. And you were speaking. I can't even remember what you were talking about, but I thought like, I like that guy. We should bring him over to Austria. And I think after your talk, I was like one of the people, one of the fanboys in line, lining up and saying like, "Hey, I want to bring you to Austria," and you were completely confused by that.
Well, most people don't usually offer you a cross-oceanic trip because you spoke good. And certainly not at a hacker conference where half of them are asking, hey, is there any way to sack out in your hotel room while you watch the rest of the con so I can get a little nap? It's usually the other way around. Like, could I get this from you? Not, we would like to bring you to a country you've never been. Everything will be covered. It'll be great. You'll love it. And that usually ends with either a life-changing experience or you're on... You're a really sad story in a creepy pasta podcast. So
Absolutely, yeah.
it
It's
worked
like
out the first way.
some new Eli Roth movie or something like that. Yes, yeah. So, but let's go back a little bit further. Not only 10 years when we met, but let's go back to 1970, the year that you were born. I was born 75, you 1970, so there is only 5 years difference.
Yeah, but you
But
missed everything. You missed
yeah,
everything.
exactly. I wanted to say that because the 5 years difference between 1970 and 1975 in terms of computer history, and you are a computer historian and a documentary filmmaker that deals with computer history, kind of like the 5 years between 1970 and 1975, they're just like they're just like almost everything. Wouldn't you agree? I'm not sure.
Well, I was a terrible computer historian my first 5 years.
Yeah,
So I
I
was
agree.
just
Probably, yes.
chewing things, trying not to crap in my pants, having a whole bunch of adults around me and being scared of them because I'm half their height. But the actual world in America, anyway, is very much one of the shifting from computers and technology being the province of big business or military, almost always with some sort of military tinge, to being reimagined as something that anybody could have. And this was a huge deal, right? Like right now in a world where we're talking about genetic and medical work, right now that's considered the province of huge companies, of military and governments. And imagine with that same amount, somebody down the street in a store you wouldn't expect trying to sell genetic sampling boxes and trying to explain to you the nature of them and what the science is. And sure, you can trace it back 50 years, and you probably will in the cute little manual that you've made to explain it, but nobody expected this was going to fall into the hands of quote unquote regular people. And so a lot of the 70s are things like computers you assemble yourself. And then a number of startups start saying, well, what if we make really pretty plastic versions, computers that aren't designed to take a bullet or be transported on the back of a tank? What if we instead make it that it could fit in the home, futuristic yet still comfortable? And those companies made a lot of money for a very short time. Then a lot of other companies jumped in because everybody copies everybody else. And then after everything was done, it pretty much ends up being 2 or 3 companies now. So it's the 70s where you see that pivot of, oh, that's not for us, that's for the Jetsons, followed by everybody with a little bit of money has one in the same way they have a luxury car, followed by everyone has one in the way that they have a car. And then eventually everybody who has one who expects to even, have a phone will have one in their phone. So.
Yeah. So how did your personal journey into the world of computers start? What was your first computer?
So my parents moved where they were for my father to work at IBM. So IBM had built a plant and research and technology center in upstate New York, one of multiple places they built. And my father started working for them in his late 20s and then moved to this plant. And so he had a family there. And there was a divorce sometime 6 or 7 years into the marriage, and that left 3 kids, a house that was mostly empty, and shared custody. And my father's work at IBM continued, and so having to suddenly come up with reasons to entertain his kids, he would bring things home from work, and one of them was a few evaluation machines that IBM had bought to understand home computers, including a Commodore PET. There were some Ataris, there were a few calculator-like computers, and these were all just to study them, to figure out, could we make one? To which the answer is, yes, they can. And there were 3 kids, but I was the one who really, really liked them. So a lot of it started out that way, me tinkering on the dining room table with this home computer while my brother and sister got actual friends and skin color. So I just basically fell in love with this thing. Just used it for hours on end, typing in programs, experimenting with programs I could find, playing games on it. And so when my father decided to buy a machine, he ended up buying an IBM computer, and I was already prepped for multiple years. I was ready for this thing. So that's the beginning of me in computers.
That's the beginning. It's interesting because there are a couple stories I've heard so far that are somehow related. Yeah, computing history and divorce seems to be in certain moments connected. For example, wasn't the whole story of the first text adventure computer game adventure that the guy, what was his name?
Oh,
Not
Will Crowther.
Will Crowther. Didn't he program the first text adventure game because he wanted to connect with his kids because he went through a divorce or something like
Correct.
that? But yeah.
Well, I mean, if you are what we like to call a pattern recognition enthusiast, you can always find themes. Societally, America has more divorce than ever, 60s into the 70s, enough that they have movies, right? Like Kramer versus Kramer, where there's the unique, like you wouldn't make a movie about a divorce anymore as being the core thing driving, like, check this out, this is what a divorce is like. um Although they did do that one with Adam Driver, right? That did have but that was more about the tenor of a relationship. It wasn't, oh my goodness, they're getting divorced. It was like about the characters again. The divorce was meaningless, just in the same way as if you did a movie and it took place in a circus, it wasn't for people to go, wow, they have circuses. So divorce is a very big societal change. And along with that, in our case, the computer served the purpose of being one of the things that my family really liked, and had, the ability to play with. But I think for other people, it would have been travel or gang violence or whatever, something else that would have been some core part driven by the family unit breakup. I've met plenty of people. Okay, so we'll say this for the crowd. I have met many people who got computers and did not get divorced. So it can work. You can make it happen. But yeah, like the place that computers play in our society and with us can sometimes fulfill portions that were filled by others. So there can be, if you get into it too much as you get into anything, a rejection of relationships and society and others. But I don't think that's any different than going whole hog on any of a number of, hobbies, church, education, research. Like you can become a student who just never talks to anybody for 4 years. And people will say, oh, I went to school with him, but nobody ever saw him, never went to a party. All he did was stay in his one cubicle in the library for 4 years. You can overdo anything, and computers are really good for that.
Yeah, but in general, it's interesting to see the 1970s and early 1980s as a kind of like there's almost this like giant societal blending going on. It's like almost like does it blend? Let's see, we'll see. And so like societal change, change in politics, sometimes going more liberal, sometimes going more conservative than like as we saw in the early 1980s. So there's so much stuff happening, and it seems that the computer revolution was very much a very instrumental part of that societal change.
I certainly think that there's two ways to think of it, right? The first one is the relative upheaval of computers entering society on the home computer and communication levels. If you look at the numbers compared to what comes later, they're very small. The amount of people who can have home computers is relatively few. The amount of people who would spend money that way, even attempts to make things like the Commodore 64 and VIC-20 to make low-cost computers, penetrates the market a certain amount, but compare that to it's weird now if you do not in some way directly or indirectly own a computer. Now, if you don't, we're concerned about you. You've been left behind. We're worried. There's things you can't do. You can't get certain government services. You can't be reached. If you, I recently just did a health and welfare check for somebody who he just had made the mistake of not answering his email for 20 days. He was working, it turned out. But a few friends contacted me and said, can you help us check on him? And I sent someone to his house, to which his wife answered the door and was like, what? And I said, later talking to both the person and the people I sent, sure, the internet isn't a cult, but on the other hand, if we don't hear from you for 3 weeks, we will use the internet to find people near you to go to your house to ask why you're not on the internet and ask you to maybe get back on the internet to tell us why you weren't on the internet. But other than that, it's totally benign, no worries. And it just reflects the fact that everything has been subsumed. Well, the 70s and the 80s are the unintended dry run for that. You have, how is a person going to place a computer in their home? And it turns out we place it in our office. How are we going to communicate with others? Well, via text and a variety of downloadable items. And what is this going to do? Like, how is this going to affect things? Well, people are going to get really good at arguing with each other a lot, all the time, possibly as the primary form of communication. And is there going to be good that comes of it? Yes. Things that used to be really expensive are going to drop like crazy because we can buy a computer and the computer can make things run faster or provide something that otherwise used to be really expensive. So we're seeing kind of the dry run, right? Like it's like a little tiny biome before it takes over the earth. And that's what, for me, the 70s and the 80s are. There's not as much concern yet about the amount of inflection it's going to have on society and people. There are people at the time who are writing lots of things. There are, if you look for them, I mean, this has been the other thing that's happened from the present day, is as more and more historical documents and things that were written are coming online, people are able to draw conclusions faster. What used to be somebody's 3-week project to determine, was this guy even in Paris between 1985 and 1987, has now become, oh yeah, no, here's the 19 times we can find him. And as a result, people are discovering, or I should say we are discovering in the present day, oh no, there were certainly lots of academics and people from the 50s onward who were like, what are these machines going to do to us? What's going to happen? And the funny part to me, let me know if I'm jumping way too big, way too quick for you, Johannes, is in the same way that we have affected dogs, I think computers have affected us. And if you prefer to be less generous, you can say the same relationship as with cows, where if a cow doesn't have a human in its life, very soon it will die from lack of maintenance. We are now permanently changed as a species because of the computer, and its functionality would be painful to remove. You can do it, and there's always going to be people who, they're more than happy to remove themselves from it. But society now expects a world where they can say certain things at a certain level of ambiance, and it will reach, if not globally, very wide. You can, the fact that you can have somebody can now do a pretty good skateboard trick in a random part of the world and have 1 million people respond to it within a day. Like we don't even completely consider that weird, that actions and things, the current concern people have about the ramifications of saying things in public, something you could have said very badly in the back of a shopping cart line can now end your job, right? The classic example is the woman who got onto a plane and she made some offhand comment, some ridiculous, not well thought out comment. And she got on that plane, and it was a plane from, I think it was America to South Africa. By the time she had landed, which, it's a bit of time, but it's not a lot of time, it had gone global. Hundreds of thousands of people were responding. Everybody was debating. Her job had been contacted. She had been fired. She, in other words, like, she got to, like, it was like literally like leaving something in a petri dish, going to bed and waking up, and this society is here, it's picketing you, and it hates you, and it's got angry, scriptures about who you are as a god. And so, yeah, like, to me, that's happening all the time. People are now completely wired in, and we can affect each other rapidly. And I think part of this is, hopefully, in my heart, I want to hope this is a phase. This is like you get a new car and you can't shut up about the car, and you're coming up with excuses to get the car, and you're offering rides even when you don't need it. Like, do you want to ride in the new car? We're going to go for a car. Oh, a car would be good here. The car becomes the solution to everything. Yeah, let's put things in the car. And I think we're doing that with computers. And I'm hoping it fades back a little bit, and that people will adjust to this always-on world. Software plays a part in it. Software will eventually become less like right now, software always assumes you want to speak as quickly as possible to the maximum amount of people all the time. And I think we will see a shift where we will say things and the computer will go, cool, I'm going to hold on to that for about 5 minutes. I'll let you think about it. Hey, I'm about to send out that thing where you said that everybody who uses this brand of soap is a bastard. Do you want to go ahead with that? You want to ship that? You ready to make that your number one bio thing under your picture? And you can go, hold it off.
So it's
So
probably asking not for artificial intelligence, but artificial emotional intelligence.
yeah, exactly. There was a program back in the 90s. You see, here's the thing. You can always find a citation, but it's tiny. The Eudora Mail program had a plugin that was called the chili plugin. And this was a chili like a very hot pepper. And what it was you type something and it would look at your words and it would evaluate it. And it would say, this is between 1 and 5 chilies. And it would go, this looks like a 5 chili letter. I'm going to put it into the outgoing mail buffer for 30 minutes and check in with you again so you can read it. This was a real program. And then at the end, it would go, here's what I'm about to send to that guy. You okay with this, Chief? And you could either go, yeah. Or you could be like, ooh, no.
And it's so funny that you pick Eudora and the chili example, because I still use Eudora.
It was a popular, huge program.
And it's dead for like over 15 years now. It's abandonware, I think, since 2006 or something like that. I still use it. My entire mail base going back to, I think, 1995 is still on my hard drive in Eudora. Still use it. And interestingly, I found a little community of other Eudora users who still use their little program from back in the days. And but I mean, that leads me to the next question. There is an active interest in the meantime in computer history. I would have said probably like 10 years, 12, 15 years ago, if you would have introduced yourself, I mean, you can probably tell stories about that, but at some point, people would probably have asked you, why the fuck do we need computer historians? And in the meantime, I guess there is a generation now that never probably touched a keyboard. And they understand that there is something like a historical value to something like a modem, because it is so abstract for them. Who would ever use such a thing? I'm not sure. Maybe you can elaborate on that a little bit.
Well, sure. So first of all, history comes from every direction. If you have people involved, you have history. And frankly, if you have animals and geography involved, you have history. But we have always had a percentage of us who collect things that were there before in a way that gives us perspective. And there, of course, have been disciplines of understanding history, either for the purposes of retelling history or modifying it for the purposes of political needs, for a very, very long time. And we've had industrial history, which is kind of what computers fall under, the history of the products and how they affect us. And there have been people doing, you can find, here's the thing, as time goes on, like I said, we're finding these documents. I found a document recently that listed every printer in most of England. And it was really weird. Like, it's super weird because it reads like a zine catalog. It's like, oh, here's these printers. They were on this street. Here's their big hits. They did this reprint of this German Bible, and they also wrote this screed about like why drinking is bad. This is all happening when I'm saying this, like 1880, 1885, something like that. Like, it's like a listing of like, if you're looking for these tech outposts, here's what they do. Here's their hot places to go. It reads almost exactly like a record store guide from the 60s or 70s. And we've done that. We have done that work. And yet there is always this resistance of people in the present to think that we've entered some sort of period where we are post history. You know what I mean? Like instead of everything, they'll look at the frankly artificial linear description of what came before, right? We used to have nothing. Now we had wheels, then we had carts, then we had trucks. Now we have cars. That's it. We're done. We're done with cars. And then they say that they live in a current present timeline of no context. It just exists and is a natural order. And those folks can really have their minds blown really quickly when you are able to bring out examples of like, oh, this person hated this person, and that's why we only have this, right? Like, people will know that there's something called Adidas and something called Puma, and they won't know the story that like two brothers were shoemakers, and then they didn't get along, and one of them moved down the street and started his own company, and one was Adidas and one was Puma, and like that's what that exists.
And we wouldn't know that the ADI in Adidas stands for Adolf, because that was the first name of one of the brothers.
Right.
So
there's like all these baked trivial items, but they represent humans interacting with humans. Like, why is this named this way? Why did they go this way? And the answer will be, like people have now gone back. We'll keep it to computers, for example. There's two major upheavals in computers manufacturing wise in the home sector in 70s and 80s. In 70s, it's that the Federal Communications Commission, which in America regulates electromagnetic waves and radio waves and signals, determines that a pretty good portion of these hot new home computers are wrecking the antenna landscape. They're interfering with televisions, they're interfering with radios, communication, everything. They need to be fixed. They need to be less, polluting, I guess would be the word. Some companies simply switch to spraying the inside of their cases. And they're like, they just slow the warehouse down, the manufacturing arm. They spray the inside of the case and ship it. And it works. That worked for the Apple II. I think it worked for the Atari. But then other ones, they couldn't do that. Design didn't allow it. So they had to completely retool. They lost a year and they had to create a new model. So people will go, why is the Model 2 coming out here and the Model 3 is coming out here? And the answer is radio waves, right? The other one is that in the 80s, there starts to be a real crunch in computer chips and getting them across to the US without paying incredibly expensive tariffs. Like, you could make a computer profitable if you could get the tariffs down on the shipping. So multiple companies, and we have found this by researching and everything else, started kind of dealing in gray market, started like getting things classified as broken or saying they came from Taiwan for research. And they were able to, and then that caused the FBI to investigate them. And there's FBI documents and so on. And what you're seeing there is historically this force. In one case, the law, and in the other case, costs of international commerce, that we only learn by studying this as a historical experience and treating it like it was important, giving it that oxygen to find out about these documents. So computer history, like a lot of these, affects us now, right? Like right now, we know that certain manufactured technology works better and worse with different races. Not in a eugenics way, not in the way that they are incapable of using it, but because literally medical equipment will treat different skin colors differently, and hand-operated dryers will ignore certain races because the testing didn't include other races. And that's an indication of societal and cultural bias being baked into our technology, not because the best technology won, not because there was a meeting, but just because it's suddenly reflecting these flaws, these oversights, and pulling them into the technology. The classic example is when you're doing artificial intelligence, you want what's called a corpus. You want a large amount of data. And for a while, there has been a run on finding quote unquote data sets. And the problem is that, and by problem, I mean, the ethics are, you can't just use anything, right? Like if you want to study faces, you can't just pay a department store money to get all of their surveillance footage and use all the faces of the people in there and then sell it as a data set. You have to have stuff that there's a clear line indication. There is no other problem with this. So in the famous Enron case of the early 2000s, where they were manipulating markets to a dangerous degree to raise energy prices, when the company was destroyed by legal teams, the entire email spool of Enron, this sociopathic company, was entered into the public record. Therefore, it was open. Therefore, they could use it for the corpus. So the most common corpus used for studying artificial intelligence of human conversation and email is the Enron corpus, which means the most sociopathic form of humans is being used to train machines on how humans are. And none of that is a logical best case win situation.
No, but there's a giant heart floating upwards, because I like that so much. The thing that you're explaining, I mean, we have seen that in a couple of times that they are trying to build AIs, they are trying to build Twitter bots, and then they're all Nazis just because we feed them incredibly weird stuff.
We also prioritize conflict. Like, there are these stories, and of course, many of them are starting to probably turn out to be apocryphal, but, like they'll do game AI testing and it'll say, you need to not lose at level 2. And so it will kill itself in level 1. So it never plays level 2, which it considers to be winning, right? Oh, I'll never die in level 2 if I just in the same way that a AI could say, I can have a perfect no complaint record if I just kill all the humans in the room. Like, they'll never complain. And we're seeing with technology in a lot of social media right now, people are starting to realize that if you construct a interaction that forces people to have a reaction, that's considered a success, right? Like if the thing says, we need, for this to be considered successful, 1,000 people need to say something about it upon seeing it. And if 1,000 people see it, you should immediately turn around and make it available to the widest audience possible, because very obviously this is successful with humans. And so let's put it everywhere. Let's put it global. And what that means is all you have to do is punch an old person in the face, because 1,000 people will have very strong opinions about punching an old person in the face. And then the algorithm will say, well, if 1,000 people responded to this within an hour, everybody should see this. And so suddenly it spreads like a virus through all of these different communities and stuff, because in each case, the algorithm is going, so I don't know what this is. Now, here's the thing. They could know what it is, but they choose not to. But I don't know what this is, but everyone loves it. And the moderators seem to be fine with it, because the old person didn't die. They just got punched. Okay. Now in maybe now or 5 years from now, they'll say, no, we do not want to. If it's this, we don't want it. And they pull it down.
There is there's this one story. So you know that, but it's back there. So like one of the projects I'm doing is called Robo Exotica, which is this crazy festival for cocktail robotics, where we have lots of different artists and hackers who build machines that serve you cocktails. And there's this one machine that I still like a lot. There was this team of people, they created a machine, and I'm not even sure it worked. They just pretended that it worked, but they had this machine, and they said it's a machine that is movable, so it's mobile, and it will try to find the most drunk person in the room with facial recognition. I think it never worked, but they were telling the story. The narrative was the
Right.
machine is trying to find the most drunk person in the room and give that person more alcohol. So almost like an escalation machine, yeah. And it seems that what you're talking about seems like the non-alcohol version of a global escalation machine. Because if the algorithms
Yeah.
want to amplify something they think is worth amplifying without understanding what is being amplified, it's like war games of social conditions.
Yeah. And the mistake that people fall for initially is you have very smart minds working on projects, and smart minds can become very focused on compartmentalizing their role. And we see this, right? We see the trauma of when people try to break out of the compartmentalized roles, where a person says, I work for this and I notice it does this terrible thing, or I see this as being portrayed as the only way to do it. And it is clearly not. Now, for some people, the beginning, the middle, and the end is, well, yeah, but we're making $1 million a minute on it. Like, yeah, it doesn't work in the way that we promise it does, but it's still making $1 million a minute. I'm not going to turn away from $1 million a minute, and everything coming out of your mouth is, I'm not going to listen as a manager, right? Like that's like a fundamental conversation I have been party to and I have heard about, just where someone just goes, well, profitable, we're done here. And at that point, a person can either leave some people make the mistake of saying, well, then I'm going to try to change from within. And they're like, I'm going to force against this. And it's like, no, they're just going to build up more and more reports about how much of a troublemaker you are and how poorly you work, build up these negative things so that when you finally figure out the actual story, which is leave and spill all the beans, we're just going to pull out all these records and show, oh, they were a problem. They never got along. This is just another line of delusion from this person. That conversation of profit versus effectiveness versus ethics versus unintended consequences turning into, therefore, intended consequences when you're made aware of them. Like, that's the new huge battleground. We've kind of dominated and fixed it to the point that relatively portable technology exists. Like the difference between you remember that that gum stick that Apple made, that one iPod that was like literally like a thin strip of metal and it held like 1,000 songs or something stupid.
Yeah.
Like, neat, but the revolution was the iPod. That was an adorable twist on the iPod. Having all of your record collection in your hand was the twist. I'm not as worried about like, oh, now it's this big, or we were able to make one that fits in your ear, or we use Bluetooth and now it's invisible. The decision and the results of it were cooked in when the iPod shows up on the scene. And we now have all of this technology involving artificial intelligence, automated decision-making, social media. It's all there now. Like, we might get variations on the story now. Like, oh, we were able to, one of the most interesting ones to me was the theoretical story that said that some group was intentionally scheduling protests in America where they would use Facebook's algorithms to find two groups that would be opposed to each other, join both, and start putting in ads talking about organizing protests, and then organizing them for the same location at the same, like, come to the park because you are anti-stripes. We're going to have an anti-stripe protest. And then having a second thing going into the stripes group and going like, there's an anti-stripes protest. We need to have a pro-stripes protest. And you should go to the park. And they're causing this huge kerfuffle by pushing two groups together that wouldn't normally meet, even though they're diametrically opposed. And you're not even in the country. You're not even part of the story. And that's because of a mechanism that Facebook set up. Like, there's longer societal issues, but Facebook turned it into a plug and play situation. You can just click a bunch of things and say, here's a kind of person I want to meet. I want to meet people who have been known to buy hair combs, who live in this capital city, who have this political leaning. Right there, right? That used to be difficult. Now it's plug and play, and we're seeing that happen, and we know it happens. So anytime now from this point forward where we act like this is that'll be the first thing that happens when people want to affect change. They'll say, oh, it's all so new. And that's where historians come in, where historians can show citations of like, this is not like everything currently happening with vaccine fear, concerns about resources, tying of political leanings to health, everything can be traced to previous vaccination and public safety and public health examples going back at least a century, right? It's like we've seen this. And sometimes what people do, if we don't have that history or we don't research that, they'll say, this has never happened before. I mean, it's an mRNA vaccine. That's brand new. And it's like, yeah, the previous ones were brand new. Like, we've had this problem. We've seen what happens. We can mitigate this. We can deal with it. We can react to it as if it is a thing. Like, we don't, whenever there's a fire, we don't say, well, there's never been a fire before. And there might be like more fires than before or something, but we're not like, this fire needs to be studied more. You don't know everything. Could be good. We could have a fire. And that to me is like the rapid world we live in, where people convince themselves, like I said, about this eternal present. It's always been this way. We've never been elsewhere without this other data. Now, like I said, when you hear me talk like this, and you brought me in to talk about computer history, the problem is that computer history mirrors human history. The relationship of machinery, of communication, of manufacturing, ramifications when one part of society has huge access to technology, whether that technology is a computer or running water, and the part that doesn't, and their conflicts and problems that cause, a missing resource to cause, I was in a beautiful, I know, Johannes, you collect dystopian moments. I know that's one of your, if you could put them in a glass case, you would do it.
Absolutely. And there are more and more coming our way.
And so during the beginning of the pandemic, one of the first things that happened, and we know why this happened, was, toilet paper became scarce. And part of it was because the toilet paper industry was aimed towards the majority of toilet paper going to industrial buildings and commercial clients. And suddenly there weren't any. And they could not just press a button and suddenly be sending them to supermarkets. They didn't have those structures in place. Eventually they figured it out, but for a long time they didn't. So suddenly toilet paper became scarce. And I wanted some toilet paper. I'm a fan. Big fan. 5 stars, toilet paper.
Would buy again.
So I was on a Discord, a chat Discord with 4,000 people. And there were 35 channels on this Discord. Each one was aimed towards a hygiene or living product. Soap, toilet paper, hand sanitizer. And it had bots. And the bots were watching every major manufacturer and shipper of these different products and watching Amazon. And it was constantly checking. So in this Discord channel, right? So now we've got computers, we've got thousands of people, and what they are all doing is they're in a channel called like pound soap or pound tissue paper. And the bot would go, Amazon has just released 500 units of toilet paper bulk, this amount for this price, this link. And then people would just go rushing to it, grab the thing, and move on. So we were using all this incredible technology to make up for this massive resource shortcoming, utilizing, frankly, military level precision reporting and response for the privilege of those who could afford or knew how to get on to this Discord, which was public to its credit. It wasn't like they were charging you to be on this service. There was a service they were trying to help, right? They're trying to help. But what they've unintentionally done is they're creating flash mobs of resource grabs to where a random person who's on Amazon sees that something is for sale and then it's gone. And they have no idea that a highly coordinated ersatz army of toilet paper seekers. And I got my toilet paper. I got 80 rolls of toilet paper in a box. And it was nice to have the scientific knowledge that takes about 9 months to go through for us in this household. So we know our toilet paper per month, per whatever ratio. But I remember being on that thing, and it has all the sense of being like at a horse race, right? Like just how the emotions go up and down, and like, it's here, the new thing's coming. And everyone goes out and it's like, all right, well, usually on Tuesdays, people like voodoo talking about like on Tuesdays usually is when Amazon usually gets a new bundle, and probably a new truck will be there around 3 p.m. So we'll be back here waiting around 2:30 for that Amazon drop to this, that was frankly to me a fascinating dystopian situation where that technology was great. I mean, if you had said to somebody in the 80s or the 90s that this was going to exist, the pure functionality of it, if you didn't end it with, and we're using it to hoard toilet paper because there's been a global crisis, it sounds amazing, right? Like, here's you're able to walk into a store and pick up any product and walk out, and it'll just be charged up to your home. Sounds fantastic. You'll be able to walk into any building, commit 15 civil infractions you didn't know because you stood in the wrong place or did this other thing, and then get home and find out you've got 15 guilty verdicts and you owe $1,300 is not so good. But it's the exact same technology. It's exactly the same. So, yeah, I mean, we're starting to figure out the missing ingredient, which is humans and human ethics.
But I mean, if you would have told someone in the 1980s that Pepper the Frog would be a fundamental part of like a cultural war going on for the presidency of the United States, they would also have not believed you.
Well, there are a bunch of people who have families, who have pretty okay houses, who I'm very happy to report will have a long and storied career trying to figure out what the hell happened between 2016 and 2021. They are going to be able to write it. There'll be lots of research. There'll be day-by-day data sets. They're gonna be able to put together something really sizzling and really pay for their family. And I'm happy for those people. I am not happy for the guinea pig situation that occurred. I mean, frankly, because you like politics, putting an unqualified person into a very high level position is not something that hasn't happened before. We've seen it with kings. We've seen it with various heads of state.
Like the German emperor, Jesus Christ.
And so you look at these things and you say, okay, and what, and you find out that society has multiple assumptions. And so people got really focused on the rules gathering. They're like, well, they shouldn't be able to do this. And the answer is, well, nobody's ever tried. When you get these rules that are things like you cannot parade an ostrich down the middle of town. There's some guy named Hans in 1932, and he's the reason why they put that law in. Because previously nobody told Hans he couldn't parade his ostrich, and it was getting a little annoying, frankly, every Sunday, this guy. And just determining the portions of the societal fabric and the fabric of law, culture, and such that were exposed to say, oh, you can't do, why can't you? I mean, what's to stop you? And the answer was, we always made this fundamental assumption that the painful process of becoming a head of state would ensure only certain personalities would go in. Sociopaths, for sure. People who considered themselves better than others, absolutely. We all knew that was part of the bargain. You don't tramp through the entire realm of a country and deal with thousands of people and don't come out different on the other side. That's been documented. I mean, that's it, right? Like, you can look at every head of state that does an election like that, certainly in America, where there's a lot of road to travel. And you look at, election diaries of them traveling, and you can see it, right? There's a picture I remember that Barack Obama had on his desk, and it was him and his wife. And what had happened was they had each done a huge swing through the country. She was doing one set, he was doing another set, because they're on this breakneck schedule that's been assigned to them by their people. And as the circumstance happened, they were meeting in the same diner for like a couple hours to do like one particularly big potential audience. So it's like, here's the husband and wife. And the shot is both of them, and they're just leaning on each other, like while talking, because they haven't seen each other for like over a week, and they've each done like 20. And the theory is that will weed out people who don't have the strength to do that. And it didn't weed out somebody who lacked that strength, the strength to consistently plow forward and talk about themselves. It didn't. But the person that came out didn't learn any lessons from that either about people or anything. So we got to experience that, right?
Yep.
And I'm not sure what lessons we're going to take from it, frankly, but somebody will be able to study this. They will learn things from it. There's technology that told us every minute of every day what people were thinking. I mean, people would be able to side by side show transcripts of news programs that were being watched, and watching those words get tweeted out 12 minutes later, like watching in real time, like, these two talking points happened on this news program. These were just tweeted over here, a form of them.
Yeah.
That's going to be very informative. That's going to be very, as we described before, the horizon line of where we're headed is very well defined.
Yeah.
That's not the big mystery. The big mystery is like how we are going to adapt to it as humans. How are the humans going to adapt, right?
From a historical perspective, it's so interesting. For example, I mean, with Twitter and the Twitter archive, we have kind of like almost like a direct kind of line into the emotional ups and downs of Trump, because we could literally follow what he was doing. So from a historian's perspective, that's perfect. I mean, Trump is what happened on Twitter and what he thought, and you can definitely analyze that to a certain degree. For example, Trump was very, as I learned just recently, very adamant about not being photographed all the time. So the Obama administration had a photographer who was constantly with Obama all the time, pretty much, and documenting it. There is so much photographic documentation about the Obama administration and President Obama, but absolutely almost nothing about Trump. So it's interesting that they are kind of like two completely different data sets of information in the, it's and what we do with it. Yeah, I've just found it very interesting.
Yeah, I know there's been some what I thought was interesting now is people got used to the 4 years being the new normal. And now you will see people literally saying things like Biden is hiding. And it's like, no, he's doing what presidents generally do. And they'll say it's been this long since this, whatever. And we clearly showed that some aspects of leadership are up for grabs and that things shift and become a new structure. Like, the press room is a functionality created by the American government for a certain mode of communication, and one which eventually the Trump administration chose to mostly eschew because they found it didn't work. And frankly, on a historical approach, totally they're right. Like there's no constitutional indication they have to have a press room. That press room arrived because technology at the time required a focused way for them to set up very bulky cameras, very intense lights to guarantee a good shot of the press secretary, the president, and any other speakers. But since we've now determined that human beings are very well adjusted to literally a camera being held up over your head in a crowd towards somebody yelling 50 feet away, naturally we would move away from that piece. Like I said, a lot of decisions of what we consider to be the normal are done, frankly, just because somebody was really, it just takes one strong-headed designer, one strong-willed company to shift how society does things especially in media, especially in technology. And I went to a real estate showing, and we're standing outside, and nobody, like, the guy keeps coming out because we have to go in groups, and the guy's calling out a name, and we're like, they just got here. And he's like, yeah, they registered. And we're like, where do you register? And he's like, this QR code. And none of us had noticed there's a big QR code on the front door of the building. And what they expected us to do, written in little lettering underneath it, was hold our phones up, because of course we would have phones, get sent to a form, fill out the form, say that we were aware of, the current pandemic and restrictions, and to take precautions and to notify them if there are any problems, and then sign, a little contract. So they didn't have any paper. They didn't have any little book. They didn't come out and say it because they had just absorbed it as a new normal, that you would have a phone, that you would aim it at the door of a place you were walking into, that you would be asked to be given consent on various things, give them personal information, and then they would call your name. Like, that just happened. And it's either going to be an anomaly that I remember from 2021, or in the future, you as a person will just be talking to another person, and you'll just be like this as you hold up your phone walking by the big eyeball that goes beep, and you're like, yeah, whatever. And like, you won't even notice that you do that anymore. And we will define somebody as a yokel, as a huckleberry, as a bumpkin who, like, just walked right over, didn't even hold his phone up, just plowed right into a building. What's wrong with that guy? I've met people who have been. I've been with people. I've been on it. I have had bad moments in dates in college with people who did not know how to negotiate a revolving door. Like I was there for their very first revolving door experience, where I'm walking with them and I just go into this food processor like it's nothing, and they're standing outside like, what the hell is this?
What's happening? Yeah, it's like they have to learn the, like, let's call it the cultural grammar of something.
Yeah, and it's and we are not used to the rapid pace of how in our politics and our society, what effects these have. And it became incredibly heated, partially because of that algorithm stuff we talked about, which is that engagement of any sort represents success at all costs. And so I think I hope we're going through a tumultuous, painful growth period instead of a, painful, never adjusting, constant black box where things poke us out of nowhere with no warning forever. Like, that was rough. That was a rough few years. And it's very hard to enunciate it because it's trauma, because it's traumatic to literally day in, day out, wake up wondering what's about to happen and being hit from a new direction. And some people thrived in that. Some people liked being reminded every day of what was going on, or that there was a fight or a battle. And, just the time we're recording this, there's a huge panic going on in the United States right now because Lil Nas X released a song, and the song has satanic imagery. And people are, engaging over this and saying like, oh, this is teaching Satan to our children. This is terrible imagery. This is awful. This is corruption of the youth. This is turning against God. And a whole bunch of us are like, I remember when this happened in the 80s. It's kind of like nostalgic because it's so low stakes. It's like, so wait, let me hear this. Somebody made a music video and you didn't like it because it was a little racy. Okay. And wait, did anybody die? Are decades-long diplomatic relations being put in jeopardy? No, it's just a song, right? 3 minutes long. Does it pole dance? Okay. Cool. That's the level of trauma and pain that we went through, and the level of happiness we can have now that it's like, oh, cool. We don't agree on a song. Like, that feels lovely. It's like a gift of.
In German, there is a term. It's of course long and complicated. Aufmerksamkeitsökonomie. So it's it's attention economy, pretty much. And it seems that the attention economy at the moment has some pretty interesting market curves, let's call it.
Yeah. And I think that we're now used to things being in real time, right? I mean, there used to be a department in a building for a company of a relative size. So a company would have like 16 floors, and there'd be a floor whose entire purpose was to be handed handwritten, shorthand, or other documents and retype them into a form that was coherent and clear, and then give them back to you within an hour or two, and it would go down there, and there'd be all these people, usually young ladies, and their job was to transcribe, print into the thing on the typewriter or whatever, and send it back to you. And we replaced all of them. We would replace that entire floor now with a mini fridge sized printer. That is what we did. So the cultural aspect of all of these women in the workplace, the cultural aspect of the size of the company, of what people's positions were, all of this is wiped away by technology. It's gone. It's just gone. We've just taken it. And one of the other side effects is that the nature of the writing changes, because it's one thing if you were going to write a certain tone of something. Like if you wrote a standard angry email of today and sent it down to the steno pool, you'd be the talk of the building for the next 2 weeks, right? Because all the people who worked it were like, take a look at what Mr. Anderson wrote. Oh my God. And they'd spread it. And then it would be something said over the thing going like, I don't know what's going on, but Mr. Anderson, I don't know. I think you got to talk to this guy. He's or avoid him. Don't bring him anything, because that letter he sent down. And that's gone. Like, we just lost that. We now have instantaneous everything, and we don't even feel the whiplash anymore of how much that changed, right? And so the fact that when you see in a TikTok video, or you see in what used to be a Vine or other things, a kid with reasonable control over, framing or an awareness of lighting or pretty good with sound can create a 1 million person audience, something that only television talk show hosts could enjoy, or Walter Cronkite and certain news programs could enjoy up to like the 70s and the 80s, and they can just do it. That is a radical shift in society that society has to process. And I think it's going to get
it's Andy Warhol's 15 minutes of fame, but it's a different 15 minutes of fame. It's
right.
Yeah.
And it's also the like, for whatever it's worth, my personal fascination is the cultural and creative affectation of YouTube's algorithms to people who could make YouTube videos with the carrot of like getting money. So they can make a certain amount of money. They can't make what they used to, but some of them can. And the fact that there's a lot of cultural criticism videos now that have these very bizarre aspects that will come out of YouTube. I'm leaving aside annotations and that tragedy. I just mean, like, I've seen them. Like, there'll be a in-depth discussion of something cinematic, and it will get to a certain point, and the screen will still have the shot, but there'll be 2 dancing anime girls in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
And you'll be like, what's going on? And the answer is, they are trying to fight the algorithm that does image recognition to figure out whether or not this is copyrighted material, because an automated bot will take their site down. And even though they can technically protest it,
it would take too
that
long.
Lost time will lose them this amount of money, and they'll lose their engagement, and they won't be able to do it. So they have to do this bizarre dance, and it won't make any sense to anybody, in the same way that seamless commercials, like, it is. If you go and look at American television, 1950s, there is this bizarre melding of advertising and the performances that I think would shock people if they hadn't seen it before. There's radio programs from the 30s of Sherlock Holmes, and literally the main characters will be like, I must stress, I'm not doing a parody here. Like, literally, like, who do we think it is? Is it Miss Havisham in the library, or was it the victor? While we're thinking about this, perhaps we should relax with a nice glass of Rothschild wine, the kind of wine that brings you joy with every sip. When I turned back to Miss Havisham, they will do that. They will slip that right in. There isn't this darkness at one bizarre point and then clearly kicks into the advertisement, then kicks out again. That's like a weird thing. We did that, and then it went away. And
now we have dancing anime girls to
anime girls, parts going
algorithms,
replacement of music, setting up, like, saying certain things because they know that certain topics are banned, and even though they're not saying that topic, using that word triggers off the algorithm. And so they, because the algorithm is doing voice recognition and is trying to read all of the text coming out of them. So it's not just a matter of I just said it, I didn't print it. Some of them are doing image recognition so that, I know Instagram does this, where if you have the word COVID in your Instagram photo, it will try to link you to COVID information. And there's no reason not to think they're not using that for other, varieties of algorithmic purpose, to say, if you use this word that causes this political reaction, you are going to be classified this way, both for the purposes of advertising and for audience engagement and who we show this to and everything else. And I think we're just adapting to this now.
Yeah,
and in 15 years, the rules will all change, and these 2020 era creations will look really weird. And again, you rely on a historian to say, oh yeah, no, for like 7 years, you couldn't put up a picture of a syringe in the background of that's why they do that. You couldn't do that. You have to put a carrot up and write syringe on it. You can't have a syringe. And nobody will understand it unless you have that context.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why we have folks like you, Jason Scott, hopefully still around in 15 years to be able to give us some historical context about the craziness of the digital sphere.
Hopefully. If not, at least I hope that I've left enough crumbs for people to piece things together.
Absolutely. I mean, there are so many, I have a long list of things I wanted to talk to you about, but of course we are way beyond our time already. I wanted to talk to you about how you got sued for $2 billion by a company because you set up a website collecting text files from the BBS era. I wanted to talk to you about your critique of Wikipedia, which is really important. There are so many things, but the good thing is most of that stuff is already somewhere out there. There is a great video of your story of the $2 billion. There is written up transcript of your Wikipedia critique, all that stuff. So people, if they like you, and I hope they like you because they stayed on the program until now, they will definitely be able to find some of your stuff on the interwebs.
I'm not hard to find. I have spoken about a lot of subjects, and I have had the privilege of appearing in a lot of wonderful events, HackerCons, conferences, and talked to people about issues that I thought of across, my life. And I'm very lucky that in my main day-to-day work as an archivist at the Internet Archive, I am engaging with, fascinating insights into history and culture and making them available. My mandate is to make them available to the maximum amount of people as much as possible, as quickly as possible every day. And that to me is like, I don't need to die because I'm already in heaven. So it's perfect as it is.
I want to hug you, like virtual.
We'll be hugging again. It's go.
Yeah.
We're gonna do one of those hugs that disturbs people. Like they're gonna start shifting in the hallway.
Yeah, the rubbing,
trying to get around us.
I don't know.
That's how it's gonna work.
We'll do that. And we don't need all this like stupid disinfectant stuff anymore.
Well, I will warn you though, dude, I'm totally on board for the mask, because dudes have lost every accessory over the course of the last 200 years. They've lost cravats, they've lost ruffles for the collar, they've lost pince nez. Yeah, exactly. Everybody has lost all these wonderful accessories, and we got back the mask, and we can have these beautiful, elaborate masks that are just beautiful, expressions. This is not a fashion show, so I won't acquire them, but I have in the home you buy these children's toy bins for the children, and we have masks in them. so we can choose what to do for the day. Am I going to go with a 1980s themed mask? Am I going to get a Japanese kabuki theater fanged mask? Am I going to do a logo? I have one that just says no, and people can interpret that as ever they want. I mean, what a beautiful unintended thing to happen, to give people an additional fashion accessory. I'm going to wear it until it's weird, in the same way that guys were wearing small eyeglasses way longer than they should have, just the monocles and the pince-nez. Like, there are people wearing those way longer than society wanted. That's going to be me in the mask. It will be part of my flourish that I will have a decorative mask, and then I will whip it off to give you the gift of discussing whatever I'm doing. That's I don't like a lot of the last 2 years, but I like that. You got to pick something out, and that's it. That's my moment. A new fashion accessory in my lifetime. Can't beat that.
I can't wait to replace those stupid, like Apple headphones with this beautiful thing. I just need an adapter plug.
Yeah, exactly.
I found it in the cupboard of my dad. He bought it, I guess, in 1971 or something like that.
Classics. I mean, they're like, I think we know this, right? Like, there's a lot of disposable fashion and a lot of disposable design, but there are historically cars, homes, tools, outfits that you look at them and they affect you as strongly as they did when they came out 10, 20, 40, 80 years ago. There are some 1920s cars. In America, we had a parallel to the computer industry and the car industry. Between 1919 and 1929, in 1919, there were 128 car companies. By 1929, I think it was 14. So as you can imagine, there were some weird cars that came out in the 20s. And you look at some of them and you're like, this is completely inefficient and ridiculous, but I'm so glad it drove around on the earth for a couple years. Where they just look like steampunk organs that, they're like, some of them believed they needed to look like locomotives. Some of them believed that they needed to be, you didn't have safety, nobody had figured out the idea of a seatbelt. So instead, the car should have 10 feet of engine compartment to protect you from your 20-mile-an-hour crash. All of these ideas, right? All of these beautiful designs, you show them to people now, they're as emotionally affecting as 100 years ago. A century-old car as a delightful reminder that we do some pretty neat stuff on this piece of rock.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining me today. It was great having you. And somewhere down there in the YouTubes, we'll put some links to your projects, the Internet
Perfect.
Archive, textfiles.com, etc. And maybe even your cat, who has 1 million Twitter followers. I don't even know. Yeah.
Everyone's got something.
Yeah. Thanks so much. Bye.
Thanks as always, Johannes.
Hey, folks, and dear ladies and gentlemen of whatever gender you prefer. That was another episode of B3 In Depth. If you want to see future episodes, please subscribe somewhere down here. I hope to see you in the future, and I hope you join the debate. Thanks.